In this video presentation, I'm going to cover what is aid and development, the history of it, and how it works in an international context, whilst covering different organisations involved within aid and development. So what is aid? Aid in its simplest form implies that the rich are helping the poor, or in an international perspective, aid can be used to describe the developed helping the developing countries, as Wickstead 2015 explained. One modern day example of aid being given would be money being given to reconstruct war-torn countries, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, as Lancaster 2008 highlight. The history of foreign aid and development can be traced back to the 19th century, as Home and White 2000 explain. In the 19th century, it became apparent that the vast amount of poverty throughout continents and countries highlighted the potential for these countries to be developed was huge. Boone, 1996, describes how the initial foreign aid and development programs had the intentions and goals to attempt to alleviate poverty and to promote growth. To understand the history of aid and development, we must comprehend why a country will want to simply invest a vast number of resources into another country. Lancaster, 2008, explained how aid can be seen as a tool to dominate and exploit developing countries, as a donor country is able to gain control of the country in need. Imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power through colonization by use of military force or other means. Hewson 2013 explains one example of this was in the late 1880s, when one of Britain's aims was to develop cultural imperialism, and towards the end of the Victorian period, sport came to play a crucial part in doing so. Cricket in the West Indies reflects and shows clearly the history of British colonialism and the politics of race embedded within that history, as Hewson 2013 emphasised. Colonialism can be referred to as the policy of acquiring full or partial control over another country whilst occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. Guer 2003 explains how cricket was brought to India as a result of colonial expansion back in the 1700s, and historically the first cricket club was formed outside of the British Empire. This was called the Calcutta Cricket Club. The Marshall Plan was a prime example of how foreign aid is given to enhance and protect one country's power. The plan came to life post-World War II on June 5, 1947. The plan was also known as the European Recovery Programme. The plan involved the USA providing foreign aid to Western Europe. But why, we may ask? Post-World War II, Europe was flattened. It needed rebuilding. However, tensions were high. America needed the economic gains that came from Europe rebuilding and strengthening. But as Steele 2018 explains, economic security would not withstand in Europe without physical security at that moment in time. At the time, American President Harry Truman and Secretary of State George Marshall devised the plan and injected over $13 billion into Western Europe alone. America wanted to foster an open trade with Europe. However, they had fear of communization spreading across Europe via the Soviet Union. Western Europe's infrastructure at the time was so badly damaged that it would have been difficult to rebuild without foreign aid, as Weissman 2013 emphasised. America recognised this as a chance to gain control over Europe, which would have come with many rewards for them. However, at the time, the Soviet Union wanted the spread of communism, but America were against this. The Marshall Plan was a commitment against the spread of communism. The strategic political development is a prime example of a country supplying foreign aid for their best interests and growth rather than doing it for the good of their heart and world development. Here at Home and White 2000 state the success of the Marshall Plan provided the impetus for turning focus onto the problems of the developing world. Non-governmental organisations, also known as NGOs, are as described non-governmental, an organisation that have desired interests and goals in human rights and world development. They further the political goals and interests and target humanitarian issues such as improving the welfare of disadvantaged. Clark, 1995, identifies a prime example of historical NGO by describing Amnesty International, which began in 1961 and initially worked to free individuals that were imprisoned for the non-violent expression of opinion. Further examples of NGOs are Oxfam, Action Aid and World Vision. Oxfam is one of the largest UK-based NGOs, currently active in 48 countries, with more than 1,000 local partners, as Footed 2017 states. Governmental organisations, also known as GEOs, are run by staff provided by the government. Governmental organisations help people in various departments. Government organisations' role are to generate an authoritative figure that supports and protects public interests. Not only that, but they also regulate industries, and they have the power to expand, maintain, or shut organisations developed in questions down. One example of a governmental organisation is UKAID. UKAID is a development programme funded by the UK taxpayer to supply aid across the world. The responsibilities of UKAID is to improve coherence and performance of British international development policies in fragile and conflicted areas. UKAID are working closely with provincial governments and partners across Pakistan on ambitious plans which will benefit millions of children and improve the standards of education set up a life of prosperity for millions who would otherwise suffer. They also work in countries across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, many of which are fragile or at risk from neighbouring countries. Intergovernmental organisations refer to two or more nations working towards a common goal in unison. Volgi, Fassett, Grant and Rogers, 2008, describe intergovernmental organisations as entities created with sufficient organisational structure and autonomy to provide formal, ongoing multilateral processes of decision-making between states, along with the capacity to execute the collective will of their members. Examples of intergovernmental organisations are United Nations, World Health Organization and European Union. Millennium Development Goals, also known as MDGs, were set up in the year 2000 when the United Nations signed the UN Millennium Declaration. This included 8 development goals to be achieved by the year 2015. These goals, as seen on screen, were devised to attempt to tackle poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, environmental issues, and discrimination against women. The World Health Organization states that some countries have made impressive gains in achieving health-related targets. However, they highlight that some are falling behind. They mention how countries making the least progress are those affected by things such as HIV, economic hardship, or conflict. Edwards 1999 explains how governments in industrialized countries are shifting to a new understanding of development, which evolves around global security. This may suggest that the developed countries are leaving the underdeveloped behind to achieve global security, and further exploiting them for economic growth in an attempt to achieve the so-called global security described by Edwards 1999. United Nations state that the Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. There are 17 different Sustainable Development Goals, as seen on screen, that are described as an urgent target to meet and tackle by the year 2030, according to the United Nations. FLUTIT 2017 states that in the 21st century, the role of aid and development agencies is crucially, firstly, providing immediate on-the-ground support to those affected by emergencies. Secondly, in working with communities to develop life chances, opportunities. And thirdly, in advocating for policy change with governments and international institutions. This coincides with the Sustainable Development Goals' aims and objectives. Riddle 2007 believes that developmental aid is better described once the purpose behind the aid is clear. Without the purpose behind the aid being clear, it is hard to see the intentions of the donor. Therefore, aid may not be at the forefront of the donor's mind.